To the DEBx stage, David Schwartz.
How many of you remember the origin of the phrase, Houston, we've had a problem? On April 13th, 1970, the Apollo 13 spaceflight had an equipment failure while on its way to the moon. In fact, an explosion damaged the life support and the electrical systems and left the 3 occupants stuck in the middle of nowhere with access to just whatever was on board to fix things. Now, several problems needed to be addressed, but the one that turned out to be the worst, they had less than 24 hours to jury-rig some repairs to deal with the rising CO2 levels so that they wouldn't suffocate. They ended up using plastic bags, duct tape, and cardboard to adapt the lunar module's square CO2 scrubber to the round air input inside the command module. Happily, they arrived back home safe and sound. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that their survival can be credited to a team of people with considerable out-of-the-box thinking skills. Now, this story brought to mind the old 1980s TV series, MacGyver. Now, if you're not familiar with MacGyver, the main theme of each episode was he'd find himself in some crazy situation where he'd have to use his ingenuity and his knowledge to escape without anybody getting hurt. Now, each episode demonstrated classic examples of outside-the-box thinking. In fact, I think the entire MacGyver TV series could have been based on the Apollo 13 episode. Now, one of the things we can observe from both what happened to Apollo 13 and from the MacGyver TV series is what's involved in turning a critical situation around. What's needed is a team, and that can make creative use of available resources, leverage their knowledge rather than power, embrace obvious constraints, and often just simply reframing the problem. Speaking of reframing, 4 years ago, the ripe old age of 64, I was diagnosed with a syndrome formerly known as Asperger's. Today, it's simply called autism. Now, for me, that diagnosis was actually an incredible moment because as I started to dive more deeply into the subject matter, a huge number of otherwise unexplainable things, all the way back to my childhood, suddenly started to make sense. In fact, applying the skills I just mentioned helped me deal with a lot of this stuff while I was growing up, because I simply had no idea why my environment always looked so foreign, why people seemed so confusing to me, and why I often felt like a visitor from another planet. Now, between 1994 and 2013, autism and Asperger syndrome had 2 separate and distinct diagnoses. To help distinguish between the two, back in the day, Dr. Asperger originally set an arbitrary metric saying that the subjects that he focused on all had to have at least a minimum IQ of 100. And that happens to be the most common IQ score. It's right in the middle. Now, over time, it turns out that the average IQ of Asperger's subjects is around 130, while the average IQ of general autism was around 70. But for whatever reasons, in 2013, the 2 separate diagnoses were merged together into a single thing called the autism spectrum disorder. That meant there were 4 people who'd been diagnosed with general autism for every one with Asperger's. And if you count, that's 1 in 5 ratio, or just 20% of the autism spectrum had Asperger's. This merger in 2013 had the unfortunate side effect, I think, of hiding the fact that most of the people with Asperger's are also considered gifted, and some twice gifted, by the educational community. But, as far as the mental health community is concerned, it's just one great big mental disorder spectrum. And that's pretty much what all anybody hears about today. I'd like to reframe that in our discussion here, in part because I take umbrage at being labeled as both disabled and as having a mental disorder. Now, it is true, I do not think like other people, but what makes that a mental disorder? I think MacGyver would agree with that, right? Now, even though MacGyver is simply a character in a popular TV show, there are real-world MacGyvers who have the gifts to do what he did. But what might we call them? You ever think about that? Can't call them Asperger's. Well, I'm going to suggest we use the word, use what Dr. Asperger's original term was that most people don't know about. He actually referred to his subjects as little professors. Do we have any little professors in the room? I bet we do. Now, I much prefer that term because it highlights the positive side of his work that doesn't get much exposure these days, and I'd love to see it used more frequently. Now, just for fun, I made a short list of parallels between what's on the MacGyver series and the skills that a lot of these little professor types frequently have. And what we have is people who tend to be very focused, and they're excellent at absorbing details and identifying patterns at all levels. Many of us are outside-of-the-box thinkers. We can adapt well to high-pressure situations. Our ability to focus for long periods of time can seem very OCD-ish. And most see the world quite holistically, even from a bird's eye view. And this is probably why I identify so closely with this MacGyver character and his exploits. These traits reflect how I approach life and solve problems in general. They also reflect the types of, complaints I've heard throughout my life from people like, "Schwartz, get your head out of the clouds!" And, "Why are you so weird and different?" So what if you wanted to add one or two people with these skills to your team or the teams that you manage? These little professors actually make up a pool of naturally talented people around the world who have a number of these innate MacGyver-like skills and abilities. In fact, most of them are being ignored, and they would love the opportunity to use their natural superpowers to benefit others. As I said, people who would be diagnosed as these little professors today tend to have several of these superpowers that come to them naturally. But as I said, only about 1 in 5 of those on the autism spectrum are little professor types. Now for me, the software projects, which is what I do, software, that were always the most fun and creative were the ones where clients sought me out to make their dreams and visions come to life. Why? Well, because they both want and need someone running the development team who can see their visions if they want to come anywhere close to meeting the time and scheduling constraints, time and budget constraints. They'll likely fail otherwise, and I've seen that happen many times. Now, as for regular jobs that I've had, being gifted gets completely lost in the hiring process. In fact, I think outside of educational settings, nobody cares about giftedness, sadly. Now, for programming work, they just want to know if I can read and write code using whatever tools and languages that they have and currently use without me needing to learn something new. It's very different than working with clients directly who want you to be able to read their mind and walk on water. Now, imagine this. You're going into a job interview, okay? And the first thing they ask you is, "So, what are your superpowers? Can you see things from a bird's eye view? Maybe you can learn to recognize patterns faster than AI?" Okay, wouldn't that be a hoot? Now, I'd like to invite you to visit our website, littleprofessor.site. It's in your program, where you can learn more about natural gifts that only 20% of people on the autism spectrum have. And if you know anybody who seems to fit the profile as a little professor, or any organizations looking to hire a MacGyver, please share the site with them as well. I believe that enough light shined on the various gifts that us little professors have, then over time, employers will begin to realize that, to be able to realize something nobody talks about, that they can selfishly hire us MacGyver types for real benefits that they can bring the organization, not just to get a tax credit as a disability hire. So in closing, the next time you're stuck in a tight spot, whether it's a mission to the moon or just, a routine snafu, don't reach for the duct tape alone. Call in a little professor. They'll MacGyver your problems using solutions you'd probably never think of. Okay? Trust me, it's worth it. Thank you.